Hi, Marianne here. Hope you are making good progress on your journey, hanging in there. I know it's really difficult and challenging at this time because of all of the energies that are at work right now. Um, Whenever we are going through this rebirthing process where various cosmic and energetic cycles are coming to an end, there's always more evidence of the extremes of this frictional occurrence. So I hope you're all hanging in there, and my intention today is to present some information to you that will help you function a little more smoothly as you go through this process and face all the challenges that we're being faced with right now. Okay, and what I'm going to be talking about is the basic operating principles that were built into the physical construct that we call our reality. They were a part of and are a part of physical reality. They're intricately intermeshed with it. And they also afford information for those of us on the conscious awakening journey to draw from and to use that information to progress our consciousness. Okay, a lot of people refer to the first level I'm going to be addressing is what many refer to as natural law principles, universal law, and so forth. What you call them doesn't really matter unless it restricts you and your perspectives. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you call them, just that you understand what they are and what they really mean. But before I get into those specific principles that were built in, I want to begin by talking about some overarching principles that are prevalent throughout all of creation. And two things. First of all is consciousness. All is energy. Remember, those are the two fundamental elements that comprise consciousness: pure potential and core energy that enables that potential to be expressed, whether physically or non-physically. Okay? And the dual nature of consciousness, another overarching principle, that throughout all of consciousness, regardless of density, dimension, realm, timeline, doesn't matter. The inherent duality of consciousness, the light and the dark, if you will, the consciousness-progressive and consciousness-regressive aspects inherent in consciousness that enable the ability for creation, the friction. And this duality is inherent, because it's inherent throughout all of consciousness. Remember, that's what we are: consciousness and vital energy. That's our core makeup, our core energy. And consciousness is a different energy than any other energy out there, of all the energies that comprise consciousness. We'll get a little more into that in a minute. But within every aspect or piece of consciousness, that means you and me, this duality is inherent as well. There is our consciousness progressive aspects and our consciousness regressive aspects. And a little bit grander scale, that accounts for all the different versions of ourselves. Some of them more consciousness progressive, some of them have been more consciousness regressive. This continues flowing outward into societies and throughout worlds and beyond, that some places in reality and time that doesn't really exist, but tend to be more consciousness progressive or more consciousness regressive. And that comes back down into us. Excuse me. Pardon me. So keep that in mind too. Okay, I'll come back to some of this in a little bit, but for right now, I'm going to proceed into the 7 fundamental principles that govern our reality. And I'm going to work with the 7 principles as laid out in Hermeticism. Again, I'm not a follower or adherent of Hermeticism, but in my opinion, I feel that these lay out the principles the most clearly and concisely. They haven't been bastardized by modern New Agers and spiritual communities to adapt to their perception of things. So that's why I'm using them. And I'll give a link below this video that will take you to the source of that information. So here we go. Okay. The principle of mentalism. That's the first. The whole of consciousness, all that is mind. The universe is mental. Thoughts lead to the manifestation of things and events. They create our conditions of existence and quality of experience on this planet, and we're responsible for them. To accept responsibility for everything we create is to become consciously aware of our thoughts. Consciousness as a whole is mind. Mind, not to be confused with brain, which is a tool of physicality within the mind-body complex. But mind is thought. Consciousness is mind. And as you know, there are different expressions through which mind functions. Even in the animal kingdom, there is a form of mind. And every form of mind is different, but of great value. There is no lesser than or greater than. So, the principle of mentalism. Thoughts lead to manifestation of things and events. That's how we first began the creational process. Everything begins with a thought. Okay, number 2. The principle of correspondence. That which is above is like to that which is below. That which is below is like to that which is above. The reality is holographic. It is self-similar across all scales. The macrocosm, the very large, the totality, if you will, and the microcosm, the very small, the individual expressions which comprise the totality, are each reflections of the other. Everything is a self-contained holographic extension of the whole of consciousness. To know the workings of the microcosm is to come to know the workings of the macrocosm, and vice versa. Reality is both holographic and fractal. Okay, let's talk about this one a minute. Principle of correspondence. That's the, as above, so below, so as below, so above. And to get really literal about this, whenever there is warring, for example, going on in this density and dimension, there is war going on in other densities and dimensions. At a more practical level, when it comes to understanding the law, the principle of correspondence, a good way to view that is to also, you could also say that to know yourself, truly know yourself, what you are, how you really work, what you were built for, so to speak, is to know the reality around you. Conversely, as you come to really intimately understand the world and how it works, such as understanding these principles, then you more intimately come to understand how you work. What the world was built for, what you were built for, how the two were designed to work together. Okay? That's the principle of correspondence. The third is the principle of vibration. Remember I said one of the overarching principles is that all is mind, and the whole of consciousness is mind and potential and energy, vital energy. Therefore, the principle of vibration. Everything moves and vibrates. Nothing is at rest. Consciousness is movement, a whole movement, fueled by all the subtle movements going on within it. Everything is pure vibratory energy, manifesting itself in different ways. Matter is energy in a state of vibratory motion. There is no solidity as such. And I address this in one of the earlier videos where when I explained how we have regressed within this reality from fourth density, fourth dimension beings to third density, third dimensional beings because of our perspectives. And I'm going to take that out a little further. If humanity were to continue on the consciousness regression path, or any being for that matter, not just humans, but this is the way it works. The lower our density becomes, the less consciousness we have, right? That means it is more we become or come more into a purely energetic state, lacking consciousness, making us more dense, so to speak. And ultimately, if all of consciousness is lost, that one regresses so far that there's no coming back, this is what accounts for what I've also called in an earlier video, that the utter black, dark entities and forces, the individual beings known as entities, but these really dark energies can no longer take physical form. They can't even take a physical form anymore. because there is so little consciousness. And ultimately, if consciousness were to disappear altogether, then that energy, entity, force ceases to exist. And that energy is transmuted into something else, somewhere else. I do not know how this works, but I do know that it ultimately it can go away. So you need to understand that about energy as well. But this mind-body complex is not solid. The illusion of solidity becomes more prevalent as consciousness diminishes. And I spoke to this in an earlier video, hence the way our bodies look now. This is not the appearance that our mind-body complex originally had. It's different. We were much more fluid, far less dense, and thus capable of moving in and out of the various densities and dimensions of our reality. That's the way we were designed initially. Okay, the fourth principle is the principle of polarity, and I've already touched on that in another video, but we'll go over that again. Everything that exists has its poles. It's a pair of opposites. And opposites are the two extremes of one thing. Identical in nature, but differing in degree. Remember, hot and cold are one and the same. They're just differing degrees. And thus, when you understand this, then these extremes meet and are reconciled. All seeming paradoxes can be thus transcended. It's a really key principle to understand, that so that you can carry that forth in your consciousness progressive thoughts, feelings, actions, and behaviors. And this ties in to our capacity for real love. When we understand, and it also ties into the fact that we are intimately interconnected with all that is, all one. Consciousness is one movement, because we can then come to understand real love. We understand that all the different facets, including the two seemingly polar opposite levels of consciousness, consciousness progression, consciousness regression, it's all consciousness. They're both of great value, but they both exist. And when we can see that they're one and the same, then we can see the value of both. We can accept that they are and work with that. And believe me, the higher density consciousness regression races and civilizations that have come here deeply understand this and have used it to their consciousness regression advantage, so to speak. So you need to really embody that, to really begin to accept that. And that even you yourself, in the different versions of yourself, you may have been the purest possible aspect of core self in one reality, and then been the complete opposite of that in another reality. So it can work that way too. But it's always working within ourselves. This is why we experience so many dichotomies in our own life and beingness. And it's when we understand the principle of polarity, then all that starts coming into play. We can start, if not approving of, but accepting that this is a part of our reality. This is just the way it is. And when you accept what is, then you are much better equipped to be sovereign, to choose your own unfolding, the way you choose to progress or not within consciousness. And it is always a choice. And I would put to you that although our regression as a whole, not everybody, and by the way, these consciousness regressive races, as I refer to them, the service to self races and civilizations, not everyone in these races, any more than all people or beings on this planet, are all consciousness regressive. Doesn't work that way. Otherwise, how could you explain, even though right now humanity as a whole is in a consciousness regression cycle, not everyone out there is predominantly, even though they have both polarities within them, there are many, and that is why so many have come, like you and myself, to bring consciousness progression, creation back into this world. And that's what it was really designed for. But I can assure you of this too, that the creators of this reality well knew that there would be consciousness regression forces and beings that came into this reality, because that's just the way it is. Even when they designed this, built this construct, and designed us and our template for consciousness progression, they understood. Perhaps they were a little, that's why I say that they were irresponsible in their creation, because they didn't stay on top of such knowledge as this, the principle of polarity and so forth. But that's good for the moment. I'll come back to some other things on that. The fifth principle is the principle of rhythm. Everything has its tides which flow in and out. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing is inherent. And again, that ties into polarity. They're different, but it ties into that. And rhythm compensates. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. In other words, as low as we might dip, let's just say even in this lifetime, in this aspect, this version of ourselves, in terms of consciousness regression behavior, service to self behaviors, that is a direct indication of the heights to which we can progress our consciousness. Swing to the left, swing to the right, equal measures. And as high as we might progress in consciousness progressions means that we can descend, and there will be those forces that are equal in consciousness regression. Okay? Now, number 6 is a biggie, and that's been interpreted and restated in countless different ways, and I'll get into some of those. But the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to this law. Nothing escapes it. And so-called chance is but a name for this principle not recognized. The plane of causality holds all power to affect change. In other words, the stance that we're coming from in every action, that's why self-mastery is critical, to begin to really take charge of and responsibility consciously for everything we think, say, and do in every moment and in every area of our lives. That's the big task that we're charged with as beings that are on this journey of awakening consciously. Okay? This law has also been referred to as the law of attraction. And I put some notes here. Let's see. The energy that you emit is the energy you attract. Energy flows where attention goes. As you think, feel, and act, so you shall be. It's also been referred to, or it's referred to, expressed in science as Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there exists an equal and opposing reaction. It's also known as karma. You reap what you sow. What goes around comes around. And it's also been referred to as the golden rule, or has been expressed that way. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Well, technically, that should read, what you do unto others will be done unto you. And the golden rule is really the consciousness progression interpretation of it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the consciousness progressive perspective of the law of cause and effect. If you don't want somebody hurting you, then don't hurt anyone else. Do no harm. And that is the fundamental operating principle, rule of engagement here. And I'll get more into that in just a moment too, and what that really means. But that's the law of cause and effect. Now, the 7th principle is the principle of gender. Gender simply is. Masculine and feminine principles are inherent in everything. And gender manifests on all planes. Mental gender comprises the coexistence of masculine aspects, largely left brain processes, and feminine aspects, largely right brain processes of the mind. And this is also fundamental to all of creation. Masculine being the action-oriented, feminine being the receptive. And that doesn't mean non-active or passive, but it takes the two in order for the byproduct child to become manifest. And that's inherent with men. The male has both masculine and feminine aspects of his beingness. The same is true with the female. It's not about the body complex, the mind-body complex in its appearance. These are aspects. These are inherent aspects throughout consciousness, and we are consciousness manifest. Okay. The overarching principle, another overarching principle within the context of the 7 principles, is the generative principle. And this is the dynamic of true care, the seed of life. And I've referred to this principle before in terms of what you participate in was what you evolve through and contribute to. So what we truly care about is the driving force. And this is where you can be really clear on what's going on with you, whether or not you're in alignment with core self or ego. But what we really care about is what drives and determines and drives our thoughts and actions. The generative principle is and our thoughts and actions are the ultimate generator of the quality of our experience, and it is revealed by those things in which we invest and I referred to that in the 5 key factors video, our energetic currency on a day in, day out basis. And our 2 energetic currencies are time and energy. What we're investing those things in tells us everything about what we really care about. No excuses, whatever. That means that, and yes, that is tempered by this next round of information that I'm going to convey. But ultimately, it is our choice. And as regressive as humanity as a whole, the collective might be right now, third density, third dimension, is the realm of choice where we have the opportunity to choose prior to, and this determines whether or not or how far we'll get in various and other densities and all, but we make the choice. Right now, everything is more in a state of flux. As I said, we're coming to the end of these major energetic cycles and getting ready to be reborn, if that's what we choose. But this is our opportunity to really to choose and live by that choice of either service to others, consciousness progression consciousness, or service to self, consciousness progression consciousness. In fact, that's one of the underlying benefits of our present reality. That's a great opportunity to really say, okay, I'm going this way, and I'm going to commit to that, whatever happens. And that's the way these higher density consciousness regression races and civilizations operate. They understand this, that singular focus of their agenda. And that's why they've been able to do what they do, because they focus on it. They understand the principle of cause and effect. They embody it. They live it. Excuse me. But that's a good overview. Now, plenty of people don't believe that these principles exist, but I mean, these are fundamental truths about the way our reality works. It is. It just is. That's the way it was constructed to function. Excuse me. And these principles are clearly evidenced through scientific understandings in our modern world. And they've been proven through painstaking experimentation and tests that are repeatable and demonstrable. But word of this scientific understanding just really hasn't yet gotten out to the many, by design. But these are the basic laws, the principles, and the basic rules of engagement here. As this world was originally designed, and they're still in operation, despite the distortions that have come into play since its creation. Now we're going to get into that. As I said, distortions are in several previous videos, but I really want you to bring this home. Distortions are false beliefs, concepts, ideologies, dogmas that limit consciousness because they limit our perspectives to a preset ideas about what is or what isn't. And they're external from our own inner understandings and keep us from that when we adhere to them. And they manifest within us and through us as self-limiting, fear-based as opposed to real love-based thoughts, emotions, actions, and as well as physical, mental, and emotional disorders. And in the macrocosm of our reality, they manifest as the wars, the massive poverty and starvation so prevalent in our world now, as various dramatic climatic events, yes, and so forth. The horrific wealth inequality, abuse of natural resources, and on and on and on. And those are distortions, all based in concepts, false ideas, concepts, and beliefs that the races that are currently sort of holding dominion in our reality operate through. They have instilled them within us to advance their agenda in this reality. Okay? And to, excuse me, take a sip of tea. And so knowing that empowers us. And other things that we need to know, part of their abilities and part of their baseline false concepts, dogmas, institutions that have really contributed to our regression in hand with our own self-irresponsibility are, as I mentioned before, religion, the religion of money, government, and right up there now is our education system. Those are the biggies. Okay, so they're there. So what do we do about that? How do we address that in relation to our journey of awakening? First of all, we have to accept it. This is what is right now. And not avoid it or pretend it's not there and that everything's all good right now, because right now it isn't per se all good. But to look it squarely in the face and say, okay, now how can I continue? How can I make progress on my journey of awakening when this overlay of false principles has been incorporated into our reality? Well, as I said, first of all, accepting it, knowing it's there. It's like, this is what is right now. And this is the first step on coming to respect what they've done. That is not to agree with it, but to begin the process through respect, their right, so to speak, to be on consciousness regressive journeys. Every being has that choice. And again, in an earlier video, I mentioned that humanity as a whole wouldn't be where we are right now if so many of us long ago hadn't given over responsibility for ourselves. These institutions could not have gotten the stronghold that they have now. We are responsible because earlier versions of ourselves, ancient, long ago, and perhaps some of us did, but not enough of us, or we didn't know how to say no, and what that really means, and how to act on that in a consciousness progressive, or through a consciousness progressive perspective. Remember, it's not about fighting against. It's about, and oftentimes means, turning your back on and standing for. Standing for consciousness progression, service to others, perspectives, and behaviors in every moment. And this is why present moment awareness and mindfulness and quality of consciousness, in other words, what are we really spending our energetic currencies on? And those reflect what we really care about at a deeper level. So, and again, this isn't about condemning yourself if that's what you come to recognize in yourself, that your conscious intentions are not in line with what you've really been doing. Accept that without condemnation. Don't condemn yourself. To say, okay, that is what has been. I can see, or in what areas of your life that you see it. And I choose something different now. I choose to see what is in myself so that I can choose something else and take a different journey, completely different journey. But it's a journey of your choosing. But to be able to do that, we have to really look. And that's why it's so important. Observation, really digging down into getting to the root distortions behind the behaviors that we're currently doing right now. You know, why am I making the choice? Why do I keep doing or choosing to be around this group of people, for example, when that's not what I really want? But why do I keep doing that? What belief am I tied to? And another aspect of distortions is also, this ties directly into ego identifications and egoic attachments. And this ties into what I was just saying. We get attached to and identify with the various roles that we are portraying and how we interpret those roles. For example, parent, sister, brother, lover, employer. More often than not, we've just accepted somebody else's interpretation of what those roles should be. And again, this goes back into labeling. And I have a name and I use my name because we have to talk and communicate. You have to call me something, and you might want to call me a lot of things at some point, but at the very least, you can start with my name. However, in doing this work and in work with clients, I don't refer to myself as a teacher, healer, guide, coach, or any of those things. Those are functions that I perform, facilitator, mentor, but those aren't what I am. Those are not what I don't identify with them. I'm not attached to them, to those roles or those labels. I just draw forth on what I need to do to progress on my own journey and support others in theirs. No labels, no identifications. But we become so, for example, in a marriage or a committed partnership, for example. Boy, and I've been that route. Even if we think we don't have key expectations built into that relationship, we do. And they don't come to light until you're really in the relationship and living it on a day in, day out basis. That's when these little subconscious expectations start rearing their little heads. And this ties back into the beliefs, the distortions that have been instilled within us, because they're the distortions that are through which these races and civilizations adhere to themselves. They put them in us. Original full humans in this original physical construct, the mind-body complex construct within the physical surroundings, we didn't operate the way that these races and civilizations have operate in the way they have entrained within us to operate. That's not the way original humanity functioned. We didn't work on a trade basis. Yes, there was exchange of energies, but not like it is in this world. And if you look closely, like I'm just talking about marriages or partnerships, non-marriage partnerships, these relationships are driven by, for the most part, not all of you, but many that are not on this journey, many of the people that are still haven't awakened or are not ever going to awaken in this reality or ever, are still functioning. They function through this exchange of energy. but in a really non-conscious way, a non-conscious understanding of that, which is why so many, and we've been steered in particular directions, like women were supposed to have this role in a marriage or partnership. Men are supposed to do this and that. And more of us are waking up to the fact it's like, why should that be the case? Both men and women, as parents, both have nurturing capacities. Both have warrior capacities. And many of these ancient, highly advanced races, everybody knew that. Women weren't at home with the children all the time. It was, and men weren't the only ones out protecting. It was both. It was a balance, a balance. When it was more appropriate for one to take a certain action, that's what happened while the other was doing this. It was a flow. None of this restrictive. And yes, now, you know, the whole stay-at-home mom thing is really, really prevalent once again in certain areas of our society. And there's nothing wrong, before any of you decide that you want to go off on me, there is nothing wrong. I've worked for a while, and then I became a stay-at-home mom, and I don't regret 1 minute of it, even though it impacted me in other ways after the fact that I wouldn't have chosen. I don't regret for 1 minute. And if one parent, whether the father or mother, can be there on a regular basis with the child or children, that's always a good thing. Instead of just turning them over, putting in the hands of others in these institutions that have been thrust upon us. But identifying and being attached to a particular role where your ego is wrapped up into it and you identify with it. I am a mother, or I am a father, or I am a whatever. That is not what you are or who you are. It is a role that you play. And when you're not functioning in that capacity, you put it down. It's not what you are, who you are. So, letting go, letting go, letting go, clearing distortions. And that involves letting go of ego identifications and attachments. These are distortions. Now, in many New Age and spiritual communities, and because many of the ancient religions that were, again, not part of the original, our reality in its original design, and our original humans, didn't, religion, what's that? But these communities put forth again, this is not condemnation. This is an observation. But put forth the notion that well, I'm going to move to another thought. I'm not going with that flow, so I'm going to progress. If it feels appropriate in a little while, I'll address it, but right now it doesn't. So, but again, freeing ourselves of distortions is key to the self-mastery process and regaining mastery of all aspects of ourselves, in all situations, in all moments, to the best of our ability. That is the work that we're tasked with. And in order to be able to do that to the greatest extent, we must understand and really embody and look to the principles that I outlined earlier, both the ones that are natural to our reality and the ones that have been imposed upon us, so that we can make clear, conscious choice of intention that's aligned with consciousness progression activities and thoughts and feelings. Because without understanding what's really going on around us and how things really work, then again, our progress will be severely impeded. And throughout history, I know I wondered many times why humanity, in this process of learning, coming to understand things, why humanity, or so much of humanity, had not been able to overcome these the things that have been imposed upon us since these other races and civilizations kind of took over things. You know, the overseers that betrayed the trust that was given them. And it all boils down to the fact that people, even those that understood what was going on and how what was being done to them, it was because they weren't able to break free of it because they didn't understand so many of the things that I'm trying to convey to you. They may have really understood these universal principles and the principles of creation that I just described to you, but they didn't understand, for example, the jurisdictions under which they were working, the fact that, to a point, even if we are intending to stand for other modus operandi and turn our backs on because we don't approve of the ways they function, people either were completely lacking or insufficient in their levels of self-mastery. Their emotions overtook them. I mean, hence all the wars. We'll just take them down. We'll fight them. Well, if you don't understand how these things are working, then, as we've seen all throughout history, it is constantly, that approach has constantly backfired on us. Even the best intentioned people who were awake to a great extent, they didn't know how to function in ways that would really allow them to progress. Because, as I mentioned earlier, to not respect these other races and where they're coming from and acknowledge that even from their consciousness regressive perspectives, there is inherent value in that, in the overall scheme of things. We don't have to like it, but we have to see it and acknowledge it. And this ties back into transgressions. When we don't work in accordance with the principles that I've outlined, the built-in principles, the principles, the original, the operating principles of our reality. I'm not talking about the externally imposed. I'm talking about the inherent principles of creation of our reality. When we don't acknowledge and work with these principles and the overarching principles of do no harm, you are responsible for your creation. And in every moment you're creating with your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, which are the byproduct of those two activities. Thinking and feeling leads to your actions. Those are the drivers behind your actions. And if you're not consciously aware in every moment and you just go off the handle, and you're not administering your emotions, remember, feel them and release them. It's not about suppressing, but being responsible for what we discharge and coming to realize that many times it is so not a good idea to discharge in the presence of others, to react through emotions, but to feel them, release them, and then make a conscious choice of action rather than reacting through them, to choose a certain response as opposed to a reaction to what's going on. And when we don't do that, when we don't take responsibility in that way, we are transgressing principle of cause and effect. And we are accountable through the law of cause and effect for those transgressions. And the transgression level for humanity as a whole right now is extremely high. And this brings me also to, I mentioned before that our physical environment, our world, is multi-dimensional in this reality. And in our original design, so are we. Multi-density, multi-dimensional. Many have talked about fourth density now coming into our world. Well, it's already here. It is here. It's just that now at the end of these cycles, it's coming more to the forefront in our perceptive abilities. And if you want to learn more about fourth density and how that works and all, you can go to my earlier video where I get more into human origins and so forth. You'll want to investigate that. It's a really important video for you to watch. But this is why this lack of understanding, lack of or insufficient self-mastery, and not really understanding both levels of the principles at play here, the natural principles of creation and those that have been entrained in us by these other races. You have to understand both. You have to understand both to be able to strategically navigate the polarity field. Because, again, as I mentioned in previous video, those of us even who are working and to a great extent able to be functioning outside of the polarity field because our understandings are deepening and growing. In this reality as it is, we still have to move around in the polarity minefield as part of living and functioning in this reality as it is now. But you can do that far more wisely when you really start embracing and deeply understanding this knowledge, embodying it, taking it out into the world, contemplating, well, what would this really mean in terms of my marriage? What would this mean in terms of my career? How would this translate in my behaviors as a parent? And that's the way the level at which we have to understand these principles in order to be working with them and progressing on our journey of awakening, our conscious journey of awakening. That's what awakening is. We seek and take head on and face, not always very pleasant, higher order knowledge. Or even if it isn't unpleasant, it's like, darn, that explains why this has been so difficult. But then use that to empower yourself. And I'll get more into this in upcoming videos, more in depth into ego identification and attachments. But I want to get back to that for a minute. Up to now, for most people in this reality, ego has been in the driver's seat, and it shows. We were brought up in this world we've nurtured ego. Ego has been nurtured from day one. Now, many spiritual communities have talked about, you need to eliminate ego. It's like, well, no, that's not really possible. And to be alive in this world, ego was designed to be a tool for us, our personal assistant, if you will, our navigator, to be able to function in this reality. And, with ego comes personality. So it's vitally important. But it has no business being in the driver's seat. That's the function of core self. And so when in those moments you become aware that ego is running the show in a particular situation, that's when you stop and imagine you're looking at a computer screen, phone screen, whatever. You minimize it. Thank you, ego, but not now. I'm running this. I'm in charge here. I know what I'm doing. I know you're just looking out for me, but bye-bye. Or whatever works for you. And you do this often enough where ego falls in and truly works with you on your journey, because ego comes to understand. You're not trying to wipe it out. You just want to show it how it should really be working and help strengthen it in that role. It's originally intended role, not the one that has been entrained in us through social conditioning and social engineering and so forth. But we, core self, your real you, your whole self, is the driver on your journey, not ego. Okay, so I'm going to put a couple of links below this video so that you can go look at for yourself the principles that I outlined here, and perhaps some other informational links, but at least you will find that link below this video, and start really coming to embody these principles and contemplating how that can play out, needs to play out in your life, and how you can use these principles and work with them to advance progress on your journey of awakening. Because they're powerful in doing that when you really understand them and know how to work with them, as opposed to against them, to transgressing them. Okay, I hope this information was of help to you. And if you did find it beneficial, I hope you will share it with your other fellow conscious journey travelers, and that you'll also visit my website and see what else I have to offer there. There's more information coming up all the time, new things being added. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, I hope your journey goes well and that you're progressing. Take care.